Today, let's talk about Taiwan. I recently watched a BBC interview of Cao Xingcheng. Cao is the founder of United Microelectronics Corporation, or UMC, the second largest semiconductor fab in Taiwan. The largest is, of course, TSMC. What I didn't know about Cao is that he has invested in mainland China back in 2001, much earlier than TSMC did. At that time, UMC didn't set up its own factories in China, but rather invested it in joint ventures with Chinese firms. This gives Cao Xingcheng a rare opportunity to watch how Chinese company operates and how government works. He said that since the 2000s, he could no longer see any point for Taiwan to reunite with China. But Wikipedia says he was still publicly supporting the idea back in 2008, as long as a democratic procedure is followed. Cao went through a lot of soul searchings during that time. But the Hong Kong protest in 2019 was really the last straw, after which he began to oppose all suggestions of reunification. He went from being hesitant about China to openly sponsoring Taiwan's military preparation against it. I think this 180-degree turn ably reflects how Taiwanese attitudes toward China has changed over the years, especially among entrepreneurs. Another reason I recommend watching his interview is that Cao Xingcheng didn't limit his opinion within the typical but mechanic narrative about Taiwan and China. Namely, Taiwan is a democracy, and China isn't. So the West must protect Taiwan from the evil mainland. Instead, he sees China and Taiwan as equal players under the same goal of achieving a higher level of civil society among the ethnic Chinese. On the issue of Taiwan trying to get rid of the word China in its official name, Cao said China and Taiwan used to be like brothers fighting over the same heritage. But China claims that since Taiwan is just a dead body, it has no right to inherit. This infuriated Taiwan, and therefore, Taiwan has no choice but to change its name and leave the house once and for all. Self-independence for Taiwan is not about having a say in what flavor of jam people can use on their toast bread. It's about individuals' feeling and dignity. What happened in Hong Kong sent a bone-chilling signal to Taiwan. Hong Kong has various social-economic problems for a very long time. The wealth gap, the housing crisis, and the lack of non-finance sector jobs. But those were all covered under the appearance of Hong Kong's prosperity. The Hong Kong government was in a bad position, where it understands that having a closer economic tie with the mainland will alleviate Hong Kong's problem. After all, mainland China still can learn a lot from Hong Kong, and Hong Kong can easily maintain a comfortable income level as China's gateway to the world. However, on the social side, Hong Kong has been consciously and unconsciously distancing itself from the mainland for decades. That's why in 2019, the amendment to the extradition rule terrified people in Hong Kong. Remember, the amendment was originally proposed not on the request from Beijing, but due to a homicide case in Taiwan committed by a Hong Konger. Extradition with mainland China is a byproduct of that legal battle. I think what happened is the Hong Kong government made a civil agreement with China that in exchange for more investments, Hong Kong has to cooperate with mainland China on certain things, especially not allowing criminals in China to use Hong Kong as a safe haven. For example, Xiao Jianhua was a billionaire who controlled numerous companies in China, across real estate, insurance, and banking. When he was charged for financial crimes in 2017, he was living in Hong Kong on resident permit. He couldn't be brought to trial in Hong Kong since the crimes were committed in mainland China. In the end, he was kidnapped by secret police in a gang movie fashion and was sent back to China. In my opinion, the amendment has in mind more for the high-profile individuals like Xiao Jianhua, rather than the average citizens in Hong Kong. After all, it's up to Beijing whom it wants to extradite. However, this is a major divergence from Hong Kong's judicial independence, so the people of Hong Kong challenge the legitimacy of Beijing's intervention. The protests escalated quickly and became a middle finger to the so-called one country, two system policy. That's when Beijing relinquished the soft talking and let in the fist of iron. The national security law passed in 2020 is a safeguard for Chinese investment and money in Hong Kong, but it is essentially the end of the one country, two system policy. I believe that Hong Kong will become a more robust economy in 5 to 10 years, but it will be a Hong Kong that looks more like China than ever before. This similarity is a big no for Taiwanese. Personally, I'm not a fan of the one country, two system policy. How can a country has two mutually exclusive political systems under one roof? It does sound appealing that you have a wall between two societies, with each side cannot interfere with the other. But think about it. In reality, the mainland people complain why they cannot have the same rights as the Hong Konger, and the Hong Konger are constantly worried about being absorbed into China, which has a tremendous amount of gravity. At the end of the day, neither side can have a sound night of sleep. I mentioned that Hong Kong has been distancing itself from the mainland for many years. Although Hong Kong is a major beneficiary of China's economic growth. This contradiction can only be explained by China's lack of positive influence, or soft power. The ordinary people in Hong Kong simply don't see their powerful neighbor in a positive way, let alone the Taiwanese. In a recent survey done by Booking.com regarding where Taiwanese want to travel after COVID, the number one destination is Japan. No surprise. Followed by the US, Germany, and Italy. If you have ever been to Taiwan and can't read Chinese, you will probably feel like you're in Japan. Popularity of Japanese culture in Taiwan is astonishing, especially among young people. They watch Japanese cartoon as kids, they take someone on a first date at a Japanese restaurant, and when they start working, they look forward to a skiing trip in Hokkaido or Nagano. Some may attribute this to Japan's 50 years occupation of Taiwan. But Japan is not only Taiwanese favorite destination, but also the Hong Kongers, the Thais, the Filipinos, and the Malaysians. Occupiers and rulers come and go, and in the end, it's a country's people's choice, which period in history they want to be associated with. For example, in Europe, cities like to boast about their Roman heritage. A city can call itself a Roman city just because they found a few gravestones carved by the Romans. If you search the word Chinese soft power on YouTube, you will find a mixture of good and bad. I'm not talking about the government, like how China's foreign investments are received by other countries. I'm talking about how the average Joe thinks about China. How often do you see a Chinese movie on the global screen? Do you know any clothing brand from China? China's obvious absence from pulp culture has a lot to do with censorship and stifling on creativity of its own people. Imagine Batman defeats Joker and then give a speech on how grateful he is for the support from the Gotham City government. So it's not a real surprise that Chinese companies find it difficult to be cool. The workaholic culture of 996 isn't helping either. But this deficiency isn't a concern for the CCP. In the CCP world, soft power is about self confidence. The logic is, since the Chinese people are now much more well off than 100 years ago, we must have done something right. Therefore, we should carry on what we're doing and feel good about ourselves. To me, this sounds more like arrogance than confidence. Of course, this glaring self hubris is just propaganda. A pragmatic person like Xi Jinping knows very well the problems that China is facing, but he needs an interpretation of China's recent past and ancient history to justify the current government's rule. For a subject as important as China-Taiwan relationship, an objective interpretation of history matters. To be more specific, the history of the past 300 years. China claims that Taiwan has always been part of the Middle Kingdom, and Taiwan doesn't agree with this, for a reason. Since the late Ming Dynasty, there were times when the emperor seeked more control of Taiwan, and there were also times when the emperor just kept Taiwan at arm's length. This on and off during the 300 years of China-Taiwan relationship shouldn't be qualified as an inherent claim on the island. We do see conflicts similar to China and Taiwan in places like Cyprus, Northern Ireland, and Abkhazia in South Caucasus. Parties on each side pick the period in history that is in favor for themselves. But later on, they have to settle on agreement because they don't want to lose hundreds of people's lives. Although China and Taiwan are not sabotaging each other right now, they don't have any incentive to sit down and talk either. For China, a peaceful reunification is still on the table, but I think the waiting is getting more and more painful. More importantly, time is not on the Chinese side. You see, China may get away with out of control military spending like where the Soviet failed. It can invest in smart and asymmetrical weapons like drones and high speed missiles, but I'm more worried about the invisible cost. By provoking China on the issue of Taiwan, the US finds a sweet spot where it can easily make China look aggressive and isolated. No, I don't think there will be a war on Taiwan. It's in the US best interest not to lose such a useful tool to torpedo China's image and achievements at any time and at almost zero cost. Speaking of war, many wonder if what happened to Ukraine will happen to Taiwan. To put into perspective, Ukraine had and still has a corrupt government. The nicest word I can think of is that Ukraine is a flawed democracy. Helping Ukraine is more out of an obligation towards the Ukrainian people against Russian invasion than a sincere support for its government. In other words, if Russia invades Belarus, whose president calls himself a dictator, I expect the US and Europe will support Belarus in similar ways. But Taiwan is different. Besides its strategic location and its dominance in semiconductor, Taiwan is a high-quality civil society. And unlike most of the OECD countries that are more or less stagnant, Taiwan is still thriving under a progressive agenda, drawing a huge amount of natural sympathizers around the world. In the US, 10% of the population identify themselves as Irish Americans. Ireland is not an official NATO member, but how do you think the US would react if Ireland ever gets intimidated? As you can see, I'm not really optimistic about Taiwan reunification, but I think there is a way out. And that is for the People's Republic of China to become a true republic, meaning the central government can no longer dictate laws and regulations of the 34 provinces. Then it's up to Taiwan if they want to join the republic. This is not a novel idea, but has its root 100 years ago. In the early Chinese National Revolution, Chen Jiongming, a general from Guangdong, was an advocate of self-determination for the provinces. He clashed with Sun Yat-sen in 1992 when Sun asked him to march northward and take over the provinces by force. Chen Jiongming refused and sent an ultimatum by bombarding Sun Yat-sen's office building and forcing him to step down. Sun managed to escape and turned this incident into a PR campaign, condemning Chen Jiongming for betraying him and thus the revolution. Chen's reputation was permanently damaged. Same went for his appeal for a republic. Some people say that China cannot become a republic because for the past 2,000 years, it has always been ruled under a dictatorship. That China is a Rosetta Stone, not a puzzle like Europe or India. I think this is probably the biggest misconception about China's history. Since the Qin dynasty in 200 BC, there have been 9 major dynasties, accounting for about 1,500 years. The other 700 years saw a China divided among multiple kingdoms, similar to medieval Europe or Japan. If we count the period of time when the emperor couldn't exert effective control over the provinces, then we have to add another 200 years. For example, in the late Tang dynasty, the emperor was so weak that he constantly worried about being invaded by the provinces. He tried to play the provinces against each other, but in the year 781, the leader of Chengde province declared war against the emperor because the emperor didn't allow him to pass the province to his son, a common practice at the time. The emperor asked another province to come and rescue the capital Chang'an, but the soldiers were not in the mood, since they didn't get paid in time. So what did they do? Of course, they stormed the capital and kicked the emperor out. Events like this were treated in Chinese textbooks as abnormal. They are petty noises against the harmony of the great dynasties. But are they? Maybe this downplaying is on purpose. What I'm saying is that leaders of China want to promote a history that is in favor of autocracy. This self-centered ego can only go away when Chinese people, including me, take our history more openly and objectively. Speaking truth about one's own history and present is a soft power by itself. Look at how the crown has drawn people's sympathy to the British royal family. The scripts are all fictional, but the audience curiosity is true. Or look at how the World Cup has propelled Qatar's influence by breaking stereotypes about the Gulf states. Think the Arabic clothing looks like costumes? Meet Laib, who is exactly a piece of cloth. Same as China during the 2008 Beijing Olympics, Qatar now has to face Western criticism over human rights issue. It's like soft power 101, a class no one can skip. Taiwan, like Hong Kong, shouldn't resign to China's ego, but should prompt China to reform itself. Actually, China has been quietly experiencing something that is similar to a republic, but not in all of China. You may have heard of the city Shanghai, but you may not have heard of the city Suzhou, Wuxi, or Ningbo. They're the rich neighbors of Shanghai. Together with some other cities, the whole Yangtze Delta region makes up a quarter of China's GDP, about the same size as Canada. After many years of integration, nowadays, local governments in the Delta region can make their own decision in areas like transportation, housing, and public services. Meanwhile, they share among themselves education resources, social security, and healthcare. For example, a patient from Jiaxing can see a doctor in Shanghai and pay through his health insurance. He used to have to pay the bill up front and then go back to Jiaxing to get reimbursed. Small steps like this will create a sense of common identity among citizens. Later on, the locals can make proposals like how much child benefits should be provided, whether or not to build a new power station, etc. Beijing will still be able to veto some of their decisions, but at least it's a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. Giving a certain amount of autonomy to the Yangtze Delta region and the Canton Bay area is unprecedented for modern China. If it goes well, China may do the same for other regions like Chengyu, Jing-Jin-Ji, and maybe Fujian, the province that is geologically and culturally the closest to Taiwan. If Taiwan sees Fujian as a standalone region rather than Beijing's Trojan horse, I think more Taiwanese may be willing to travel or even settle down in Fujian, forging a deeper tie between people on the opposite side of the channel. That being said, I think Taiwan will never accept partnership with Beijing, but it may accept partnership with a more independent and vibrant Fujian. This is not because of Fujian or China's economic and political influence, but a natural affinity to a place where their ancestors used to live and pray. In this video, I call Taiwanese people they and call we as the Chinese, because I truly believe that now they're a different group of people from us. Knowing that my friends from Taiwan have very different habits and values, I fully respect this distinction. However, I can't stop feeling a bit sad to see China and Taiwan drifting further apart. Our economy, our foreign policy, and the way we see ourselves. I feel fortunate that I've been to Taiwan in 2016. Who knows when will be the next time I'm allowed to visit. The awesome food and hotel, the friendly people, the museums, and the nostalgia for a China kept forever in the rear mirror.